.NET 5 with Scott Hunter.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for the past episodes and show notes. And the goal of this podcast is to empower you and your teams with the information that you need to move fast and deliver consistent quality using the .NET and Azure ecosystem. And not just develop, but also run your software systems with confidence in Azure. And so for those of you running .NET and Azure user groups, I've been doing a lot of online video presentations. If you run one of these groups, I'd love to give a presentation for you. And our sponsor is my company, ClearMeasure, which is a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results. And if we can help, please get in touch. If you are a .NET developer and would like a path to become an architect, we are hiring. Just apply on the website, clearmeasure.com. 4 positions are open at the time of this recording. Well, I'm excited about today's guest on the show, none other than Scott Hunter. He is the Director of Program Management for .NET, and my definition is the .NET big dog, running all kinds of stuff, lots going on, never sleeps. Scott, welcome back to the show. How are you, sir?
I am great. It's cool. I'm so happy to be back on the show. It's been I've known you for so long. I almost my entire Microsoft career now that I think about it, because
wow.
you were around back in the early MVC days, if I remember, which is going to put us back to about 2008.
It actually 2007.
We started in late 2007, but no, we didn't have any bits or anything until 2008.
Right.
For people that don't know, kind of the history is I joined the company in August of 2007. And then a month after I joined, Phil Hack, who kind of was the MVC driver at Microsoft for many years, and NuGet, followed me by about a month. And then a month after that, Scott Hanselman came into Microsoft as well. And so we were 3 of the core people in that whole wave of, actually, if you really think about it, Jeffrey, that was when we kind of realized for the first time that it was hard to actually work and add features to .NET Framework. And so MVC was one of the first projects that we did outside of .NET Framework, just as an add-on. And I don't even think we didn't even have NuGet then either. I think we actually just gave you a pile of assemblies to add to your project. Because NuGet came around 2009, 2010.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there was a conference in Austin, Texas, where I'm at. Was it October, September, something like that? It was in the fall, and Scott Guthrie came and presented. I think, if I remember correctly, it was the first audience where he showed a demo of the MVC prototype, and I remember that conference because he and I went and had dinner, and he showed it to me, and I actually gave him some tips for, okay, present it this way, don't present it that way, you'll get eaten alive. Because it was a lot of, in that audience there was a lot of MVC activists. There were some people who were shouting, we need more stuff like Rails. There were some people that were shouting Castle had an MVC related framework, and so. But then we had the first bits in 2008. But yeah, there are some technologies that set the stage for the next decade. And that was one of them.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Scott Guthrie coming, to Austin, because at the .NET Conf conference that we just had a few weeks ago for the launch of .NET 5, we brought Scott into the keynote for about 12 to 15 minutes, and he kind of reminisced about some of the past as well. And I saw stuff that even I had not even seen before. So he was telling us that ASP.NET was actually, even though .NET Framework didn't ship until 2002, he was working on ASP.NET in like 1997 and 1998.
Yeah.
And, for all the folks out there that work the way we all work today, kind of all digital, he brought out this book,
right?
A physical book
it's
with
like an
hand
inch
drawings,
thick, wasn't it?
Huh? Yeah,
it's crazy.
But it was very nostalgic, and because we were asking him questions like, you've kind of going down memory lane here. We asked him about postbacks, which was a feature of ASP.NET at the time, and he was saying, which you and I probably both have forgotten this, that back in so for folks that are listening, ASP.NET used a feature called postbacks to basically, when you took an action on the page, it was the way that we would send the request back to the server and tell the server what you did, and so the server could redraw the screen again. And Scott was actually saying that when they first were working on ASP.NET, they had to make sure the postback could work both with JavaScript and without JavaScript, because all browsers didn't have JavaScript back in that era. Which is something that I, as you look at like a Blazor application or any of the modern apps that we use, you can't even imagine that there was no way to run any code in the browser. It all had to be done on the server side. It just shows you how far we've gone. But it was cool having him on and having him answer and talk to a couple of the things that even I didn't know.
Yeah, now we don't care about apps running on Netscape anymore. It used to be. I wish I had known there, because I started, my first programming job was in 1997, and here he was working on this new thing, and I had to write a whole lot of active server pages code. But
then back then it wasn't even called ASP.NET; it was called ASP++.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to guess it might have been Java based as well, because we were doing Java back then as well. So who knows what I'd have to go back and ask him. Next time I see him, I'll have to ask him, what were the first prototypes? What language were they actually using?
Right.
Because there was no C# in 1997.
Right. Now, .NET Conf just happened. If anybody's been paying attention, they're going back, and if they missed, I'm sure that there were probably some people who watched, quote, TV for 3 days straight to get all of it. But, there's a lot of people watching all the recordings in double speed, which is awesome. There are some technologies that are cool, and then some where 10 years from now, we're going to look back and say, oh yeah, that was a decade technology. What do you think? What's your prediction here? Which ones are the big ones that people really need to invest in, because otherwise they're going to regret it?
Well, it's funny. I mean, a lot of the technology that we have, let's say in .NET 5, is already decade-old technology already, and it's amazing to me in some cases that it's still around. I mean, to me, the one thing I think of all the way back, even to 2007, 2008, the idea of having RESTful web APIs. The fact that we're now in 2020 and that's still a thing, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. I think, that's not the answer you're thinking about, but I'm going to get there anyways. But it is amazing to see those technologies that persist, for years and years and years, and are still just as important today as they were then. Obviously, I think the thing that from a .NET perspective, there's two things that I kind of think of moving forward. Number one is ASP.NET Blazor is some pretty amazing tech. And for folks who don't know it, Blazor is meant to build. It's a ASP.NET framework for building web applications that are what we would call a SPA application, single page applications that feel more desktop than they feel that they're web. So I think Blazor is something that if you're a .NET developer or a developer all up, you should be looking at, because the goal of Blazor is to say, the number of tools and the number of languages and the number of things you have to know to build a awesome web application decreases to a smaller subset. Web is already hard. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, then maybe some kind of server-side technology, whether it's Node.js or it's .NET or it's Java. And then each of those has their own tool chains. If you're building the client side version of the markup, you might be running some tools there to process your programming text before it actually goes out to the browser. The same thing on the server side. And so Blazor, I think, is pretty exciting because you get one tool chain, one language, and it works across the entire ecosystem or lifetime of the web application. So I think that is something that people should be looking at. But where my head is really right now, and it's kind of the next thing that we're thinking of from the .NET perspective, is, and we'll kind of digress a little bit. If you don't know what an Electron application is, an Electron application is basically a web app that runs as a desktop app. And pretty much all of us are using these today, whether you're, at Microsoft. I use Microsoft Teams. And that's the way that we do most of our work, especially in 2020, with the state of the world. But if you're running Slack, or you're running Spotify, or lots of other, I think Dropbox is one as well. And what these are is, writing cross-platform applications is hard. If you want to make an app that looks the same on Windows and looks the same on a Mac and looks the same on Linux, well, each of those have completely different UI technologies. And so what many of us have been doing is, you and I, Jeffrey, for a long time have been building web applications, but sometimes a web app's not enough. Mm-hmm. Many of these cases, these apps are Electron applications because, well, they want to talk to the microphone on your computer, or they want to talk to the video camera on your computer. They want to talk to the file system. They want native access to the hardware. Yeah. And that's where you take web can't do that because web runs in the sandbox of the browser. But if you take the web app and shove it into a desktop application, well, then suddenly it has the magic of being able to do more than it could. And today, the primary way people write these things is using something called Electron, which is a Node.js based approach to doing this. And I think, Blazor, as we already mentioned, is a great way of building an application. What if you could build a Blazor application that also could run on the desktop as a native desktop application? I think that's what you're going to see us do in the .NET 6 wave. We'll likely take Xamarin. And for folks that don't know, Xamarin is our cross-platform UI tech in .NET. And we're going to try to put a Blazor web view inside of a Xamarin application. So then suddenly your Blazor application, which will look the same on Windows and Mac, now can actually talk to local stuff on the machine. And so that's we've shown prototypes of running Blazor inside of Electron, but that feels a little weird. It's like, hey, let's take all this .NET tech and then wrap it in JavaScript and Node.js. And so we don't want to do that. Right. But I do think this is an area that's super interesting to us moving forward. I just met a customer a few weeks ago that modernized a dry cleaning application. And so what they are is they're a company that builds kind of a software as a service, I should say, for a dry cleaner. So they manage all the customers, they manage the orders for the clothes, they manage the cash register and the displays in the building. And that was actually a VB6 application that they wrote a long time ago, and they just modernized it to a Blazor application. And it is, when I was on the call with the customer, it was like, this app is gorgeous. And I saw the VB6 version as well. And it's amazing how much, how cool the new one looked, but they had to do exactly what I described. They actually took a WPF app and they put a web view inside of it, and they ran the Blazor app inside of that because they actually needed to have that, for the customer, it's fine. They can run it on their phone or on their PC. Mm-hmm. But for the dry cleaner, the actual retail business, the app needs to have access to the cash register. It needs to have access to the whatever mechanism makes those racks that with all the clothes on them spin around and do their stuff. Sure. And so they had to turn this into what I would call a hybrid application. And so I think in the .NET 6 wave, we would love to take the investments we've had in Blazor and move them into the next category, which is hybrid, where you have a hybrid of being a web application and being a native application. So to me, that space is a super interesting space, and we hope to have an awesome solution in .NET for our customers to enable that. You can do it today. There's an open source project called electron.net. It's not too hard to get a Blazor app running in that, but I would really like to give you a solution where it's only .net. And so that's an area that I am super interested in as we think forward.
That is fascinating. There's two tracks that seem to be going at Microsoft in the same path. And just recently, Conf for the Uno platform and the XAML framework now can also be deployed. The Windows, I saw the Windows Calculator app has been recoded as XAML and is now running via a URL call in WebAssembly as well. How do these two track? Is there a convergence at .NET 6, or what's the vision there?
I don't think we know yet. WebAssembly. For folks that don't know what WebAssembly is, Blazor can run two ways. It can run server side, which is what I actually recommend for most people because it's the smallest payload comes to your browser. But there's another exciting version of Blazor, which is our WebAssembly. We shipped it about mid-year this year, 2020. And WebAssembly is some cool tech that lets you run any language inside the browser. When browsers were first created, the only language you could run inside the browser was JavaScript. But as the browsers has become more persuasive in the world that we live in, a lot of the apps we use are in the browser. There's this notion of, well, what if we could democratize the browser and say it's not only JavaScript, but you could run C++, you could run Java, you could run Go, you could run .NET in the browser. And so WebAssembly lets us do that. And you might ask yourself, well, why would I care about that? The benefit of a WebAssembly application is this enables a browser app to be fully disconnected. There was a demo that we did at the Build conference earlier this year, where we had we built a fake car rental application where the person that would actually check the car back in, would go scan the car, take pictures of any of the damage and all that kind of stuff. And we built that as a Blazor WebAssembly application, and we would demo it where we would just turn the internet off. And show that the person could actually check all the cars in, do all this stuff, and then when the internet came back up, the app would sync up and put all that into the cloud. And so the WebAssembly enables that capability. It enables what we call a PWA, which is a web application that feels more like a desktop application. And so that's actually a checkbox in the file new for a Blazor application. Is you can check the PWA box if you want to have an app like that. But as you said, the cool thing about WebAssembly is there's plenty of people. I believe actually, Jeffrey, there's somebody that's actually got WinForms. There's a WinForms WebAssembly project.
Oh, nice.
There's a lot of limitations because WebAssembly today is single threaded. And so everything's not going to work, but there's somewhere in GitHub, there's a project to get WinForm projects running in WebAssembly. You mentioned Uno. Uno is some people that have been taking some of the XAML tech and making them cross-platform. And one of the flavors that Uno runs in is WebAssembly as well. And so suddenly you can take what used to be a desktop application and run it in the browser, which is pretty fascinating. And then you can take it to the next level that I was describing, which is if you then took that WebAssembly app and wrapped it in some native shell, well, then that desktop app that runs in the browser now can also talk to local resources. Yeah. So that likely, whatever we do, people could shove, Uno controls into. That's kind of the cool thing that we were thinking of as well. Is imagine it's a Xamarin app, and you can put native stuff inside of the Xamarin app. There's a demo that I have. I don't have it on the PC I'm on, or I would do a demo for you, where we actually take I can find a link to it though. Have you looked at the mobile Blazor bindings?
Yes. Yeah, we can put that in the show notes. The link to it. Yeah,
put that in the show notes. There's the project that kind of shows some of this is we have an experimental project called Mobile Blazor Bindings, and there was two things that we were trying to think about in Mobile Blazor Bindings. The first was instead of writing your Xamarin app in XAML, what if you wrote it in Blazor syntax? Because just to be fair, XML is old.
Yeah.
And most of us use more modern things like JSON or HTML to define stuff today. And so this project is an experiment saying, what if you actually wrote your XAML in Blazor style syntax, which is more webby? It also means you get a better data binding experience, a simpler data binding experience than you get in XAML today. So those are two of the things it tries to solve. But the third thing it does is it actually lets you put Blazor and Xamarin controls together in the same application. And so we've got a pretty cool demo where you have the default Blazor app, and you have a native Xamarin text label and a native Xamarin button. And as you click either in the Blazor app or in the native part, the state stays in sync between these two things. So something like that is likely to be in .NET 6. We probably won't go as far as the Blazor syntax and stuff. We'll start with a XAML approach and then look at the syntax again, probably in .NET 7. Because we're curious when it comes to, if you look at some of the more modern frameworks like Flutter, you don't write your UI with XML or HTML. You write your UI is all written in code. And so we think that's interesting. And so there's another .NET project out there called Project Comet by James Clancy, one of the folks on the team. And he's got a prototype of a project where you write all your UI in C#. And so then there's the mobile Blazor bindings. You write all your UI in Blazor syntax. Obviously, we have too many choices, and so that's why we're not going to ship any of that right now. We want to make sure that we figure out what the right thing is for customers. Mm-hmm. But it does blur some of those barriers as well. It lets you actually put Xamarin and Blazor together in a single project. You can use it today if you want. Alon Lipton, somebody you know really well, that worked on the ASP.NET MVC team. This is his project.
Nice. Well, then we know it's going to come out well. Awesome.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
Well, so there's XAML for UI, and of course with WPF coming forward in .NET 5, there's new life into that as well. And then there's the HTML and the CSS. From a labor pool perspective, it seems like there's just a mountain more people who know how to lay out a screen and style something and make something attractive using the HTML CSS combination than XAML. And any number of contracts, you say, hey, this needs to be beautiful. You can just contract with a designer. They don't need to know anything of Blazor or anything, but if it's HTML and CSS, then be pretty affordable. Is that in your thought process?
It is. It's like, as you mentioned, we brought WinForms and WPF. Those are the two biggest, UI stacks that ran on .NET Framework. We brought both of those into .NET Core and .NET Core 3.1. And we brought them obviously into .NET 5 as well. We primarily brought those because when we looked at our data, we saw there was millions of developers still building WinForm WPF applications, or they're at least maintaining existing ones. And so we brought those forward into the framework. And we've even been surprised by the usage. When it comes to any time that somebody migrates something from like .NET Framework to .NET Core or .NET 5, we've been telling our customers it's safe to stay on the old tech. The old tech is part of Windows; it's not going away. But we brought over 200,000 of those developers have already moved to the .NET Core / .NET 5 wave. But as you said, I think of that tech as I want native UI. I want full access to the hardware. But as you said, web is everywhere today, and it's easy to find a web developer. And any web developer can, use CSS and HTML to build some pretty amazing looking applications. As you said, you don't have to be a Blazor developer. You can go to a design firm and have them actually, build you some mock-ups and stuff in web UI, which you can then Blazorify if you want to make that into an ASP.NET application. So I do think that is why we see more and more of this. Is there's just more web developers than there are XAML developers or XML developers or any of these markup language kind of things. And the tech runs on all the devices. And so that's why we've seen this kind of trend. And that's why we want to make sure that as a .NET developer, we, make the right things available to you to do that.
One of the small announcements that I think is actually a big deal, and maybe you can tell me if it was intended this way or if maybe I'm thinking of in the wrong way, is the isolated CSS, the cascading style sheets. It's no longer CSS, it's just CS, or it's a style, it's SS. It's no longer, because the cascading part so hard. You change a style, but unless you look at every screen in the entire rest of the application, you don't know if you accidentally screwed up something else.
Right. Well, imagine a Blazor app. Some of the isolation that you saw in Blazor and .NET 5 is also because, you and I, before we jumped on this call today, we were talking about building web applications, and maybe you use a progress control or a Telerik control or a Radzen control. Well, what if one of those has styles that then interact with that mess up the styles of the other one?
Yeah.
We do know our developers, mix a lot of stuff together. Most apps are kind of mutts. And you need to make sure that all that tech is isolated from each other. And so it doesn't, it doesn't break. I'll tell people a funny story that one of the cool benefits of being on the .NET team and working at Microsoft is I get to go see a lot of customers and how they use our products. You would be blown away if I told you how many customers actually use more than one web UI tech in the same application. Here's a React app that also has some Angular, or an Angular app that has some React. And then once again, you have the same challenge that we were just talking about, which is making sure those two things don't collide with each other. I'll make it sound even scary, Jeffrey. We have found plenty of apps where you'll see like 3 versions of Angular and 1 version of React in the same app.
Oh, wow.
And that's because each independent groups and teams build each of the pieces of the app. And then it's somebody's job to shove that into a bigger app that contains all of them. And we talk about the size on disk or the network traffic for like a Blazor app or a Blazor WebAssembly app. We're trying to keep a Blazor app, under 10 megs or 5 megs. These apps are 60 megs because they're using so many of these JavaScript frameworks together.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you look at the features in Blazor that came out in .NET 5, there's 3 things that really come to mind to me. One is performance. So Blazor apps just got 30% faster across the board, especially Blazor WASM apps. There's the isolation, which means you can build components in Blazor and not worry about them leaking over into other components. And then there's the virtualization features. And in the keynote, Dan Roth did an amazing demo, and we were doing a dry run the week before. And he's like, yeah, and I'll add tens of thousands of rows. And I'm like, just add 1 million. And so for folks that don't know what this feature is, one of the problems with web tech is, a lot of customers, especially .NET customers, are grid customers. They have grids of data, and they might have, not tens or hundreds, they might have millions of rows of data. And so how do you actually make that work? Back in the old days, when we first were doing MVC, you literally would probably just pipe the 1 million rows down to the browser. It would take a few minutes, and then you would have a very slow scroll bar when you were done. Your browser would be using tons of RAM. And after that, people use JavaScript to do tricky stuff where, as you move the scroll bar, it would go do a fetch. And that was kind of complicated. With the virtualization that we added in Blazor and .NET 5, it's actually really easy to build an application that hosts millions of rows of data. And we do all the hard work of doing all the fetching and stuff for you. And so Dan was doing a demo where, he had like 1 million rows, and you could see as he has the network tools open, as he scrolls the scroll bar, you would see the fetches happening to grab stuff, piecemeal as the app scrolled. And so that's probably my favorite feature in Blazor 5 is going to be the virtualization feature because it hits so many customers, and everybody has to go roll their own solution to this, and making it a framework component. That's the benefit of using a framework, is we can take the hard stuff and give you a simplified approach for it.
Now, there's this one paradigm in a browser-based application that doesn't exist in desktop or mobile applications, and that's the back button or the open in a new tab concept. What's the design sense on that? Are those actually going to be supported in a first-class way, or are we going to say, no, just layer on your views like a stack, and the going back is just getting rid of the top stack and you're back where you were?
That's obviously a great area to go do a bunch of work on in the future as well. There's a couple of areas in Blazor that there's work left to be done. Back button would be something to have what do you expect to happen when you go back? Another one is state server as well. The app you were showing me earlier, Jeffrey, was a Blazor server application. If that Blazor application gets disconnected from the server, you basically have to refresh the browser in that case, because once that connection is broken, the way Blazor server works is the server has an idea of what's on the client, and then when you make a change on the client by clicking something, the server then diffs, re-renders on the server the page and does the diff and sends the diff back, which is why the page size is very small. But it also means if you lose that connection to the server, it doesn't know what to diff anymore, and so the whole app kind of snaps. So that's an area we're also exploring with. There's a couple of actor frameworks. I don't like the term actor models, but it's the way that we would actually solve this, which is having an actor on the server that represents you, the user, and it would keep that state, which means even if you got disconnected or you jump to another server, well, it would just grab the actor and know the state of you. So I think so the back button's an interesting one. I think the actor model for keeping state between disconnections is another one that we still have to accomplish in Blazor. So there's plenty of work there. In fact, as we were talking about Blazor, I was going to say there's also one more final one that I think is a cool feature that we had in 5 as well, which is the pre-render server, where we can actually render the first page on the server for you, which prevents that spinning circle saying waiting for the app to load. I think that's a pretty cool feature that we did in the 5 wave as well. So there's lots of little stuff there, but there's also plenty of just small things. Like once again, that dry cleaner customer, we asked them, how much JavaScript did you write? In their case, they wrote about 25 lines of JavaScript. And so we, of course, took notes so we can make sure those 25 lines of JavaScript go away as well.
Go away. Well, that's huge. That part of your vision is that .NET developers don't have to be reliant on this other language just to write .NET.
Right. It's make you learn less tech to be able to accomplish, what you want to accomplish. Once again, I'm not bashing JavaScript. There's plenty of awesome uses for JavaScript. There's some awesome JavaScript frameworks out there. But even that virtualization stuff we just talked about, the benefit of having a big, rich framework like .NET is we can go solve the virtualization, the pre-render. There's a whole bunch of things we can do for you. And so the benefit of being a .NET developer is because we build a large framework, we can build a lot of tech for you. And that's our job. Our job is to make developers more productive. We had another amazing customer. I think we actually talked about this customer at .NET Conf as well in the keynote. They chose .NET and Blazor for one of their applications because they had a deadline of building something in a week. Mm-hmm. And they were able to actually build something pretty full featured very, very quickly. They would have struggled to do that if they had to have JavaScript developers and CSS developers and HTML developers, but they were able to take some of the controls created by both our component vendors and the community and quickly throw together something in less than a week, which is pretty crazy.
Wow. Yeah, that is really fast. And yeah, this is .NET reinvading in a big way client development or front end development. Whereas there's a lot of people and recruiters that are just constantly slinging job descriptions, and they've made a term of, quote, front end developer, basically a synonym of JavaScript framework developer.
Right.
That's the thought process that they have. And so this, and in a large extent, that's kind of been true for a number of years for a lot of people. For
a long time. I think since Angular, even maybe before Angular, maybe even all the way back to jQuery UI, because jQuery was kind of the first, real super popular JavaScript framework that kind of passed the web. And I think that, building the front end in JavaScript is also what leads people to think of building the back end in JavaScript, using technology like Node.js. And that's another cool part of Blazor as well, which is you can build both the client and the server in the same technology. And once again, I'm not a language basher because we build, I work at Microsoft, we do Azure, we support everything.
Yeah.
But one of the areas where .NET is especially good is server-side performance. We actually there's a public benchmark called Tech Empower, which is where a variety of frameworks, whether it's JavaScript or it's .NET or it's Java or Go or Rust or Python, they're all put there. And if you go look at that benchmark, you'll find that in most cases .NET is in the top 10. And we're not only are we in the top 10, I would think .NET and Java are probably the two full frameworks that do everything. A lot of that tech that's in the top 10 are just weird side projects that somebody went and tried to go optimize. We are what we would call a full stack, meaning that you can do your server-side programming, your client-side programming, jobs, all of everything. It in our tech. And so but I think it's an advantage once again of .NET is, our server-side performance is amazing. And it's an area that we strive to every release to get better and better at. So like most of those Tech Empower benchmarks, we lifted all of them each by about 30% between .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5. JSON serialization is one that we've spent a lot of work on in .NET 5, making faster. And so what we have found is most customers, like, Microsoft's a big .NET shop. Obviously, we build Java and a bunch of other tech for some of our internal services too. But as some of the internal teams are moving their applications from .NET Framework to .NET Core / .NET 5, they are seeing a 25 to 30% cost savings on the new tech. And that's just because of those perf improvements I mentioned before. They didn't rewrite the app. They basically just ported the app as it was. But, in a world where we're cloud-based, 25% is a lot. It means they can run on smaller memory. They can run on smaller CPUs, which means the cost to run the service drop dramatically. The Bing search engine is one that has made this journey already, and I think we've shared some of that data publicly before. They're one of the ones that saw 25% performance improvement, which then is COGS reductions as they move to .NET Core 3.1 and then .NET 5.
So specifically, if a team is at .NET 4.8 right now, and they've got they've been no .NET Core, but they're at 4.8, and they're thinking, .NET 5, now it's the time for me to go from 4.8 to 5. And there's some jumps that they have to make. But when they're talking with management, aside from the frameworks that they would never consider building their business applications in anyway, is .NET 5 the fastest real platform? Forget the ones that nobody's ever heard of and nobody would ever use, but of the real programming platforms.
I think it is. Some of those public benchmarks kind of show that it is. So I believe it is the fastest framework for that. I think also it's it's funny you mentioned this, the 4.8 to 5. People might be asking, why is this not called .NET Core 4 or .NET Core 5? And that was because we are trying to solve the problem you just mentioned, which is, we're on this couple-year journey to unify .NET back into a single platform. .NET over time broke into, there's the Xamarin Tech for building mobile applications. There's .NET Core, which was the cross-platform version of .NET. We're slowly trying to merge all of it back into a single entity again, without the negatives of the .NET framework. Still side by side, smaller footprint, only use what you need. And so naming was a big thing. This is called .NET 5 because .NET 5 is bigger than .NET Framework 4.8. And that's a signal to our customers that we want you to build new applications on .NET 5. But I'll throw something out there. We probably in January, as part of the .NET 6 wave, .NET 6 will ship next November, we are going to provide better porting tools. So obviously we have plenty of customers that we work with and help them move their applications from .NET Framework to .NET Core /.NET 5. And we have a couple of tools. There's one called Try Convert. That's a tool that will convert the project file from an older project to a newer project. We are working on a tool that does a lot of this for you. So what it'll do is it'll first convert the project for you using Try Convert. It will then go and look at all the packages that you use and fix those as well. So if you're using a package that there's a .NET Core /.NET 5 version of, it'll swap the packages out for you. Then it will actually go and look at common things that we just know that if you did this before, you should now do this, and make those code fix-ups. And likely in the Xamarin Space, it'll actually fix some of the namespaces too. And so our hope is that by the time we ship .NET 6 next November, we have a tool that would really help an existing enterprise or programmer take in the .NET Framework application and more easily move it forward into the .NET 5, .NET 6 wave. So we're going to try to help. Once again, nothing's magic, and we'll tell people that but we can do a lot of the hard work for you. What the tool primarily does is all the things that we've done as we help move customers manually. Wow, I just did this manually 75 times. Okay, let's find a way to automate this. And that will be a theme of .NET 6. And in .NET 6, we do think that the .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7 wave is where customers should go. And we think in .NET 6, we're mature enough that maybe it is the time to move your existing application to this new tech to once again save some money, have a faster running application, and then get you into places we just mentioned. Hey, take that old WinForm application and maybe modernize it, all the way into Blazor. And so you get as you said, it's easier to find HTML developers than it is to go find WinForm or XAML developers.
Yeah, for sure. Man, this is a lot of information, and of course, there's no way we could cover everything that was announced at .NET Conf. It's just a massive amount, but we appreciate your leadership and kind of pushing this forward. It's a great vision, and hey, it creates jobs for so many people, and it solves so many business problems. So, hey, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, and I am looking forward to hopefully being able to do this in person sometime in the future when the pandemic's over.
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.